Watamuli, hello and welcome to my reflective presentation, incorporating traditional Indigenous games with evidence-based pedagogy in health and physical education. My name is Andrew Ross and I want to share with you my recent experience in planning and teaching a health and physical education lesson as a pre-service teacher. Before we continue with the presentation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of my local community, the Wulgurugaba and Bindal people, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. In this task, I was required to plan and teach a HPE lesson at my professional experience school that focused on incorporating a traditional Indigenous game from the Australian Sports Commission's Yalunga resource. This opportunity was associated with some professional learning outcomes, as it afforded some exposure to planning a HPE lesson based on the Australian curriculum, researching, selecting and implementing HPE teaching strategies, considering the needs of my students, as well as developing and evaluating learning outcomes for them. The class I would conduct the lesson with was a Year 6 cohort consisting of 24 students, 13 males and 11 females. 10 of the students were Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander. My overall objective when undertaking this task was to effectively research, plan and implement a health and physical education lesson that aligned with evidence-based teaching strategies, developed student understanding and respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, culture and language, and incorporated learning aspects of the Australian curriculum's Year 5 and 6 achievement standards. In devising the teaching and learning sequence for this task, there was some specific criteria that had to be met, which included aligning the content of the lesson with the Australian curriculum's movement and physical activity strand of the HPE learning area. Speaking with the HPE teacher at my school, the students had been engaging in touch football, which gave me the idea of finding a game that would perhaps help develop their passing and throwing skills. Based on this, I closely analysed the Yalunga, which means playing, resource, and came across the Barinjin game, which seemed like a good fit to achieve this goal. Accessing the Australian curriculum website, I referred to the substrands of the movement and physical activity strand of the HPE learning area to determine which content descriptors would form the basis of my lesson. Next, I had to determine what the best teaching strategies specific to physical activity would be in teaching the students Barinjin. I had read about an instructional approach to tactical learning through Game Sense that I was willing to trial, as it would provide students with an opportunity to make tactical decisions and engage in problem solving. My theory was that exposing them to such a way of learning would assist with their overall performance in ball games, but more specifically in touch football. In mapping this out in more detail, I intended on briefing the students about certain rules and parameters of the game and allowing them to figure out how to approach the tactics and strategic components of the game, both in an individual sense and as a team. This approach also aligns to the inclusion of a critical inquiry approach, which is one of the 5 HPE propositions. Other learning aspects associated with this lesson were centered on embedding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives and pedagogies, which is evidenced as promoting the notion of inclusion and contributing to the development of knowledge, understanding, and respect for Indigenous history, culture, and language. I decided the entire lesson would be based on these principles, and as such, discussed with a friend of mine, a local Aboriginal traditional owner, Eddie, which isn't his real name, the possibility of involving him in the lesson. I wanted to provide students with an authentic opportunity to engage in a traditional Indigenous game, have exposure to some Aboriginal language, and participate in traditional ways of learning. Seeking feedback from my teacher, she was very positive and indicated that she was excited to see the lesson take place. She said, "Your lesson plan is clear, concise, and aligns to the Australian curriculum. You've considered the needs of diverse students and you've used appropriate teaching methods." Eddie and I actually practiced delivering the lesson prior to student arrival to ensure we were familiar with each part of the lesson, which helped develop confidence in what was being taught. I found this to be very effective and I would recommend it to other pre-service teachers. Eddie conducted a welcome to country for the students when they first arrived, which set the tone for the lesson. Following this, Eddie introduced the game we would be playing, Barinjin. He talked about the meaning of Barinjin and its heritage. He shared with the students how Aboriginal children played the game on the land, in their bare feet, under the sun. After the introduction to Beringian, I explained how we would engage in the game and how I hoped students would leave the lesson with an increased respect and knowledge about Indigenous culture, but also take away some skills that could help them apply to some other games, such as touch football. In applying the game sense teaching strategy, I briefed the students about how to play and vaguely explained the rules before commencing. A majority seemed very confused. There was a lack of communication, passes weren't finding their mark, the ball was fumbled. Some students expressed that they didn't understand how to score. I allowed this to continue for a few minutes before pausing the game and bringing the groups back together. I asked the students, "What's working well? What isn't?" I queried if there were any ideas on how we could improve teamwork. I allowed the students to brainstorm within their teams for a few minutes. They made some recommendations on adaptations they could make, and we recommenced the game, trialing their solutions. This made an immediate difference to their organisation as they spread out across the playing field and started communicating more effectively. Within the first minute, a point was scored. I could see the students were making progress. I made further modifications to the game objectives, which included aspects of maintaining possession, the number of steps students were permitted to take with the ball, and the introduction of offside rules. The student responses to these modifications was varied, but as an observation for the majority, there would only be 1 or 2 occasions where a mistake was made before the rest of the participants adapted to comply and achieve the objective. Concluding the lesson, we sat down as a group and Eddie explained what a yarning circle was and how we would all contribute to the yarning circle. He emphasized the importance of respect for one another and how sharing together can build positive relationships. He encouraged the students to reflect on what they had learned and to share that learning with the group. The students responded extremely positively to this. One student made reference to how their observation of others helped them to problem solve, whilst another shared how they enjoyed learning about Aboriginal culture and history. Reflecting holistically on the planning and implementation experience of this task allowed me to identify some strengths and areas for improvement. Whilst the content descriptors helped shape the direction of the lesson, I felt I could have made connections to literacy and numeracy opportunities as general capabilities of the curriculum. Certain aspects of safety, whilst not the focus of the lesson, could have been incorporated. The duration of the lesson was not ideal. A greater length of time, or having the opportunity to teach across a series of lessons, would have made the learning far more meaningful. Comments made by a number of students indicated that they had certainly taken away aspects of adaptability and problem solving in games, whilst others described their cultural learning, which suggests the lesson was successful. However, to adequately determine student learning, assessment would need to take place. Based on the student feedback and my own observations, I am confident the student inquiry and game sense pedagogical approaches can be effective. If given the opportunity again, I would have also researched more efficient ways for team selection, as the method I used took far too long. The inclusion of Eddie was positive, and the HPE teacher commented on this and how it was such a great benefit as we were connecting the school with the community. I have included the following references and resources for further information. Firstly, the Yalunga Traditional Indigenous Games resource is an essential tool for any HPE teacher. It's comprehensive and caters for different group sizes, students with physical disabilities, and clearly articulates how to play each game with resources, rules, etc. I highly recommend it. The Embedding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Perspective Statement, or ETSIPS, is also essential for teachers in the development of culturally appropriate content and pedagogies. The ETSIPS document provided me with some clear guidelines for the development and delivery of my lesson. My incorporation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives and pedagogies was also strengthened through an article published by Norman Sheehan titled Indigenous Knowledge and Respectful Design, an Evidence-Based Approach. Whilst not specific to the realm of education, it touches on a number of cultural practices and knowledge systems that have been utilised by Indigenous people for thousands of years. It gave me a greater understanding and respect for the yarning circle as a culturally safe space to freely and openly share and develop relationships. The book Developing Game Sense Through Tactical Learning, a resource for teachers and coaches, was very helpful in providing guidance in the appropriate application of HPE teaching strategies. The inclusion of task constraints in tactical learning was taken from this resource and was, from what I observed, very effective for problem solving. I am also a strong advocate for the inclusion of Indigenous elders or community members across the school community to engage with and draw upon in the education and development of student learning, not only for Indigenous related content and input, but to be viewed as an integral part of the school community as we work towards the goal of reconciliation. I would like to thank Eddie for his contribution to this lesson and the HPE teacher for allowing me to execute my lesson. Thank you.